The morning sun cast long shadows across Camp Pendleton as Staff Sergeant Maya Rodriguez stepped out of the dusty Humvee, her pink rifle case slung across her shoulder. The hot California air hit her face, but it wasn't the heat that made her jaw clench. It was the sound that followed her everywhere she went. Laughter. "Look what we got here, boys," called out Gunnery Sergeant Mike Torres from across the firing range. His voice carried that particular tone Maya had heard 1,000 times before, the tone that said she didn't belong. "Barbie's got herself a gun case." The group of Marines gathered around the shooting benches turned to stare. Some smirked. Others shook their heads. A few just looked away, embarrassed by what they were witnessing but unwilling to speak up. Maya had heard it all before. In boot camp at Paris Island, where drill instructors questioned whether a girl from East LA could handle the pressure. During advanced infantry training, where fellow Marines whispered that she only made it through because the Corps needed to fill their diversity quotas. And now here, at the most elite sniper school in the military, where she was the only woman in a class of 32 Marines. But today was different. Today the mockery cut deeper because of what that pink case represented. 3 months earlier, Maya's 8-year-old niece Sophia had been diagnosed with leukemia. The little girl who used to braid Maya's hair and ask endless questions about being a Marine was now fighting for her life in a hospital bed. During Maya's last visit home to Los Angeles, Sophia had grabbed her aunt's hand with surprising strength. "Tia Maya," she had whispered, using the Spanish word for aunt that always made Maya's heart melt. "I want you to carry something of mine when you go back to the Marines." Sophia had pointed to her pink backpack in the corner of the hospital room. "Use the pink. So you remember me. So you remember to be brave like a girl." Maya had carefully removed all her gear from her standard-issue rifle case and transferred everything to a bright pink case she'd ordered online. It wasn't regulation. It definitely wasn't tactical. But it carried the love and hope of a little girl who believed her aunt could do anything. Now, as she walked across the firing range with that case, Maya felt every eye on her. The whispers followed like a toxic cloud. "Probably. Can't even zero her scope," muttered Lance. "Corporal Davis, I give her 2 days. Before she requests a transfer," added Corporal Johnson. "This ain't no place for pretty pink princesses," Torres said loud enough for everyone to hear. Maya set down her case and began unpacking her M40A6 sniper rifle with practiced precision. Her movements were steady, deliberate. She'd done this routine thousands of times, but never under this level of scrutiny. Never with this much at stake. The Marine Corps Scout Sniper School was legendary for breaking strong men. The dropout rate hovered around 70%. Students faced grueling physical challenges, complex ballistics calculations, and psychological pressure that would crack most people. And that was before the final test that would determine who earned the coveted title of Marine Scout Sniper. But Maya hadn't come here to quit. She'd come here to prove something. Not just to these Marines who looked at her like she was playing dress-up in their world. Not just to the Corps that had questioned her every step of the way. She'd come here to prove something to herself. And to a little girl lying in a hospital bed who needed to believe that girls could be warriors too. The range instructor, a weathered gunnery sergeant named Williams, called for attention. His voice boomed across the range like thunder. "Listen up, Marines. Today we begin the final phase of your training. Over the next 72 hours, you'll face challenges that will test every skill you've learned and every ounce of courage you possess." Maya felt her pulse quicken. This was it. The moment she'd trained for, suffered for, bled for. You'll navigate hostile terrain. You'll calculate shots under extreme pressure. You'll operate with minimal sleep and maximum stress. And at the end of it all, you'll face the final marksmanship test that separates the pretenders from the legends. Williams paused, his steely gaze sweeping across the group of Marines. When his eyes landed on Maya and her pink case, his expression didn't change. But she saw something flicker there. Maybe respect, maybe doubt, maybe both. "Some of you think you know what it takes to be a sniper," he continued. "You think it's about fancy equipment or tough talk. But I'm here to tell you something. A sniper's greatest weapon isn't his rifle. It's his mind. His discipline. His ability to perform when everything around him is falling apart." Torres leaned over to one of his buddies and stage whispered, "Wonder if Princess here brought her matching pink camo." A few Marines chuckled, but Maya noticed that some looked uncomfortable. Good. Maybe there were a few decent ones in this group after all. The Marines who graduate from this program will join an elite brotherhood, Williams said. They'll carry a legacy that stretches back to World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan. They'll be trusted with the lives of their fellow Marines and the success of critical missions. Maya thought about all the times she'd been told she wasn't strong enough, fast enough, tough enough. About the drill instructor who'd made her do extra push-ups while screaming that she was holding back the men. About the lieutenant who'd suggested she might be happier in administration. But she also thought about the Marine in Afghanistan, who'd told her she was the best radio operator he'd ever worked with. About the squad that had trusted her to call in air support during a firefight. About Sophia, who looked at her with such pride and admiration. Your first challenge begins now, Williams announced. Full gear, 15-mile movement to the designated coordinates. You have 4 hours. Anyone who arrives after the deadline is automatically dropped from the program. The Marines around Maya began grabbing their packs and equipment. The weight of a full sniper kit was crushing. Over 60 pounds of gear including rifle, ammunition, spotting scope, and survival equipment. She watched as several Marines struggled to hoist their packs onto their shoulders. Maya lifted her pack with smooth efficiency. Years of hauling equipment across rough terrain had built the kind of functional strength that didn't show in a mirror, but revealed itself when it mattered most. As she adjusted her straps and checked her gear, she heard Torres behind her. This is going to be good, he said to his friends. Princess is about to learn what real Marines can do. Maya turned and looked him straight in the eye. Her voice was calm, steady, and carried just enough steel to cut through his smugness. You're absolutely right, Gunny, she said. I am about to learn what real Marines can do. She hoisted her pink rifle case and started toward the starting point, leaving Torres and his friends to wonder if she'd just agreed with them or issued a challenge. The desert stretched out before them like a test written in sand and stone. Somewhere out there at coordinates she'd memorized waited the next phase of her journey. Between here and there lay 15 miles of brutal terrain, scorching heat, and the kind of challenge that separated those who talked from those who delivered. Maya checked her compass, adjusted her pack one final time, and began to run. Behind her she could hear the thundering footsteps of 31 Marines who thought they knew what she was made of. They were about to find out just how wrong they were. The first mile was always a lie. Maya's boots found their rhythm on the hard-packed desert floor as the group of Marines spread out across the terrain. The morning air was still cool, energy levels were high, and confidence ran thick through the ranks. But Maya knew better. She'd learned long ago that the desert didn't care about your confidence. Torres had positioned himself near the front of the pack, his longer stride eating up ground as he set a punishing pace. Every few minutes he'd glance back at Maya with a smirk that said he was already planning his victory speech. Come on, Princess, he called over his shoulder. Don't want to keep the real Marines waiting. Maya didn't respond. She'd learned that the desert taught its lessons to those who talked too much and too early. Instead, she focused on her breathing, her form, and the steady rhythm that would carry her through the next 4 hours. By mile 3, the sun had climbed higher, and the desert began to show its true face. The temperature climbed past 90 degrees, and the soft sand sections that had looked manageable from a distance turned into energy-draining quicksand that grabbed at boots and tested every muscle in the legs. Maya watched as 2 Marines near the middle of the pack began to struggle. Their pack seemed to grow heavier with each step, and their breathing became labored. She recognized the signs. In another mile, maybe 2, they'd be in real trouble, but her attention was drawn to something else. Torres, who'd been setting the blistering pace at the front, was starting to show cracks in his armor. His stride had shortened slightly, and she could see the tension in his shoulders as his pack began to feel like what it was, 60 pounds of dead weight in rising heat. Maya had learned about pacing the hard way. During her deployment in Afghanistan, she'd volunteered for every patrol, every mission that would let her prove herself. On her 3rd month in country, she'd pushed too hard during a 12-hour movement through mountain terrain. She'd made it to the objective, but barely, and had learned a lesson that stuck. The mission wasn't won in the first mile. It was won in the last one. At mile 5, the first Marine dropped out, Lance Corporal Peterson, a stocky kid from Michigan who'd been talking big the night before, stumbled to a halt beside a cluster of rocks. His face was flushed red, and his breathing was coming in short, desperate gasps. I'm done, he wheezed as Maya passed him. Can't do it. Maya wanted to stop, wanted to help, but she knew the rules. This wasn't a team exercise. This was individual survival. Each Marine had to prove they could handle the pressure alone. As she crested a small ridge, Maya caught sight of the front runners again. Torres was still in the lead, but his form was deteriorating. Behind him, 3 other Marines maintained a steady pace that looked sustainable. Smart, but it was what she saw behind them that made her heart sink. Corporal Martinez, a quiet Marine from Texas who'd always treated her with respect, was limping badly. His left leg was clearly bothering him, and with each step he fell further behind the main group. Maya had seen that kind of limp before, probably a stress fracture or severe shin splints, the kind of injury that could end a career if pushed too far. Maya made a decision that went against every tactical instinct she'd developed. She slowed down, not enough to fail the time requirement, but enough to let Martinez catch up. When he came alongside her, she could see the pain etched in his face. "Rodriguez," he panted. Don't wait for me. You'll miss the cutoff." "Shut up and drink water," Maya said firmly. "And tell me what's wrong with your leg." Martinez looked surprised by her directness, but answered honestly. "Stress fracture. Had it x-rayed last month. Doc said I should take it easy, but you're too stubborn to quit," Maya finished. She understood. Sometimes the thing that made you a good Marine was the same thing that could destroy you. "Listen," she said, adjusting her pace to match his painful gait. "We've got 7 miles left and 2 hours to do it. That's totally doable if we're smart about it." "We?" Martinez asked. Maya nodded toward a series of low hills ahead. "See those ridgelines? I've been studying the terrain maps for weeks. If we take the longer route around the south side, we avoid most of the soft sand and steep climbs. It's an extra half-mile, but we'll save energy and time." Martinez studied her face. "Why are you helping me? Everyone else just wants to prove they're better than everyone else." Maya thought about Sophia in her hospital bed, fighting a battle that made this 15-mile movement look like a warm-up. She thought about all the times someone could have helped her but chose not to. All the times she'd been left to sink or swim on her own. "Because Marines don't leave Marines behind," she said simply. For the next 3 miles, Maya guided Martinez along the route she'd memorized, pointing out the best footing, sharing her water when his ran low, and maintaining a steady pace that kept his injury from getting worse. They passed 2 more Marines who had dropped out, sitting in whatever shade they could find, waiting for the follow-up vehicles. At mile 10, they caught up with the main group. Torres was no longer in the lead. The punishing pace he'd set in the first half had caught up with him, and he was now struggling in the middle of the pack, his face bright red and his movements showing clear signs of heat exhaustion. When he saw Maya and Martinez approaching, his expression shifted from exhaustion to anger. Well, he panted. "Look who decided to play nursemaid. Guess the princess has a soft spot for the wounded." "Keep moving, Torres," Maya said calmly. "We've all got a job to finish." But Torres wasn't done. Maybe it was the heat, maybe it was the frustration of his own failing performance, but something in him snapped. "You know what your problem is, Rodriguez?" he said, stopping completely and forcing the Marines behind him to navigate around. "You think this is all some kind of game? You think carrying that ridiculous pink case and playing nice with everyone makes you special?" Maya stopped too, and suddenly the desert felt very quiet. "But this isn't a game," Torres continued, his voice rising. "This is the Marine Corps, this is war. And when the shooting starts, when real Marines are counting on you to make the shot that saves their lives, your pretty pink equipment isn't going to help. Your feelings aren't going to help. And your desperate need to prove you belong isn't going to help." The other Marines had stopped now too, forming a loose circle around the confrontation. Maya could feel their eyes on her, waiting to see how she'd respond, waiting to see if Torres was right. Maya looked at Torres for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was steady, calm, and carried across the desert like steel wrapped in silk. "You're absolutely right about one thing, Gunny," she said. "When the shooting starts, none of that other stuff matters. The only thing that matters is whether you can make the shot." She adjusted her pack and started walking again. "I guess we'll find out soon enough who can and who can't." With 2 miles left to go, Maya could see the designated coordinates in the distance, a cluster of military vehicles and what looked like a temporary command post. But more importantly, she could see something else, a shooting range, fresh targets, and the unmistakable silhouette of the kind of precision rifle setup that meant only one thing: The marksmanship test was about to begin. Behind her, Torres was struggling to keep up, his earlier confidence replaced by the grim reality of heat exhaustion and poor pacing. Around her, the Marines who had survived the movement were beginning to understand that the hardest part wasn't behind them. It was waiting ahead. Maya thought about Sophia, about the pink case that had drawn so much mockery, about every person who had ever told her she didn't belong. In less than an hour, all the talking would stop and the shooting would begin. Maya and Martinez crossed the finish line with 43 minutes to spare. The command post buzzed with activity as Marines collapsed into whatever shade they could find, gulping water and trying to process what came next. Of the 32 Marines who had started the movement, only 19 remained. The desert had claimed 13 warriors before the real test even began. Gunnery Sergeant Williams stood behind a folding table covered with clipboards and stopwatches, his weathered face showing no emotion as he checked off names, but Maya caught him glancing at her pink case with something that might have been curiosity. "Martinez Rodriguez," he called out. "Good work on the movement. Martinez, get that leg looked at by the corpsman. Rodriguez, you're in the first shooting group." Torres stumbled across the finish line 6 minutes later, his face purple with heat exhaustion and something that looked a lot like humiliation. He'd been passed by 3 Marines in the final mile, including the woman he'd spent the morning mocking. As the corpsman examined Martinez's leg, Maya surveyed the shooting range that would determine her fate. 500 meters downrange, barely visible targets waited like small judgments. Between here and there, heat waves danced off the desert floor, creating the kind of optical challenges that separated good shooters from great ones. But it wasn't the distance that made Maya's pulse quicken. It was the setup. This wasn't a standard marksmanship test. The rifles were positioned on uneven ground with no shooting benches or stable platforms. Shooters would have to find their own support, calculate wind and elevation changes in real time, and demonstrate the kind of fieldcraft that kept snipers alive in combat. More importantly, Maya noticed something the other Marines had missed. The targets weren't static. They were mounted on a system that would expose them for limited windows of time, requiring shooters to acquire, aim, and fire with the speed and precision of actual combat engagements. Williams's voice cut through the afternoon heat like a blade. "Listen up, Marines. What you see before you is the closest thing to real combat conditions we can create without someone actually shooting back at you. You'll engage 5 targets at distances ranging from 300 to 800 meters. Each target will be exposed for exactly 15 seconds. Miss that window and you miss your chance." Maya felt her breathing steady as her mind shifted into the zone she'd discovered years ago during her first deployment. Time seemed to slow down, and every detail of the environment became crystal clear. You'll be scored on accuracy, speed, and your ability to adapt to changing conditions. Williams continued. "Perfect score is 50 points. Anything below 35 points is an automatic failure. Anything below 40 points means you'll probably wash out in the advanced phases." Torres wiped sweat from his forehead and muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. Finally, a test that separates the real Marines from the wannabes. Maya began unpacking her gear with the methodical precision that had become second nature. As she opened her pink case, she heard the familiar whispers and snickers from the Marines around her. But this time something was different. This time, she smiled, because as Maya lifted her rifle from that bright pink case, every Marine within 30 feet stopped talking. The weapon in her hands wasn't standard issue. It wasn't even close to standard issue. What Maya revealed was a custom-built precision rifle that looked like it belonged in the hands of an Olympic shooter or a special operations sniper. The barrel was free-floated and heavy, designed for extreme accuracy. The stock was adjustable and perfectly fitted to her build. The scope was military-grade but fine-tuned to specifications that most Marines could only dream about. "Jesus," whispered one of the Marines. "Where did she get that thing?" Maya heard the question but didn't answer. She couldn't explain that this rifle represented 2 years of saving every penny of her combat pay. She couldn't tell them about the gunsmith in Los Angeles who'd worked with her for months to build the perfect precision weapon. She couldn't describe the hundreds of hours she'd spent at civilian ranges, perfecting her craft on her own time and with her own money. Most of all, she couldn't explain that this rifle existed because of a promise she'd made to herself in a hospital room 3 months earlier, looking at a little girl who believed her aunt could do anything. Torres stared at the weapon with something approaching awe, then shook his head dismissively. Fancy equipment doesn't make a shooter. Let's see what she can actually do with it. Williams called for the first group of 5 Marines to take their positions. Maya was assigned to Lane 3 with Torres in Lane 5. The other Marines were solid shooters who'd earned their places through consistent performance. But Maya could see the uncertainty in their movements as they settled into position. First target will appear at 400 meters, Williams announced. Wind is currently 3 to 5 knots from the southwest. Temperature is 96 degrees. Atmospheric pressure is standard. You have 2 minutes to calculate your dope and prepare your position. Maya dropped into a prone position behind her rifle and immediately began her mental calculations. Wind speed, temperature, humidity, barometric pressure, all factors that would affect bullet trajectory over 400 meters. But more than that, she began reading the terrain like a map written in sand and stone. The other Marines were adjusting their scopes and checking their equipment. Torres was muttering numbers under his breath, working through ballistics calculations, but Maya was doing something different. She was becoming one with the environment, letting her instincts merge with her technical knowledge in a way that couldn't be taught in any school. Targets up in 10 seconds, Williams called out. Maya's breathing slowed to 4 counts in. Hold for 4 counts out. Her heart rate dropped. The world around her faded until there was nothing but the crosshairs of her scope and the target area 400 meters away. Targets up. The silhouette appeared like a ghost materializing in the desert heat. Maya's rifle spoke once, a sharp crack that cut through the afternoon air. Before the echo faded, she was already transitioning to the next firing position for target 2. 15 seconds later, Williams lowered his binoculars and looked at the results called in from the target pit. Lane 1 hit. Lane 2 miss. Lane 3 center mass. Lane 4 hit. Lane 5 hit. Maya had not just hit her target. She'd placed her bullet dead center in the scoring ring. A shot that would have been impressive at 100 meters, let alone 400, but she was already focused on target 2, which would appear at 600 meters with different wind conditions and a smaller scoring area. Second target will appear at 600 meters, Williams announced. Wind has shifted to 4 to 7 knots from the west. Target exposure time is 12 seconds. Maya made her adjustments with fluid precision, her scope clicking as she dialed in the new settings. Around her, she could hear the other Marines making their own calculations, some with confidence, others with growing uncertainty. Targets up. Again, Maya's rifle spoke with authority. Again, the target pit reported a center mass hit. But this time, she wasn't alone. Torres had also placed a solid hit, as had the Marine in Lane 1. The pattern continued through targets 3 and 4. Maya placed perfect shots on each target, but Torres and 2 other Marines were keeping pace. By the time they reached the final target, the competition had narrowed to 4 Marines out of the original 5. Final target, Williams announced, and Maya could hear something different in his voice. 800 meters. Wind is variable, 5 to 10 knots, shifting between southwest and west. Target exposure time is 10 seconds. 800 meters. In desert heat with shifting wind conditions and a 10-second window, this was the shot that would separate pretenders from legends. Maya settled behind her rifle one final time and began her calculations. But as she looked through her scope toward the target area, she saw something that made her blood run cold. The target wasn't just 800 meters away. It was positioned on the far side of a small valley, where thermals and wind currents would be completely unpredictable. Heat mirages danced across her field of view, making precise aim nearly impossible. This wasn't just a marksmanship test. This was the kind of shot that required instinct, experience, and a level of skill that couldn't be taught in any classroom. Maya closed her eyes for just a moment and thought about Sophia, about the little girl who was fighting her own impossible battle with courage that put every Marine on this range to shame. When she opened her eyes, Maya Rodriguez was no longer just another Marine trying to prove herself. She was something else entirely. Targets up in 5 seconds, Williams called out. Maya's world narrowed to a single point of focus 800 meters away, where everything she'd worked for, everything she'd sacrificed for, waited in the dancing heat of the desert afternoon. Targets up. The silhouette materialized through the heat shimmer like a mirage becoming real. 800 meters away, barely visible through the dancing thermals, Maya's target waited for exactly 10 seconds, but Maya didn't fire. For 3 precious seconds, she held her position, her breathing steady, her finger resting lightly on the trigger. Around her, she could hear the sharp cracks of other rifles as Torres and the remaining Marines took their shots. Still, Maya waited. 4 seconds. 5 seconds. The target would disappear in 5 more heartbeats, and with it, her chance to prove everything she'd worked for. Then, in the space between one breath and the next, Maya felt it. The wind shifted, the thermals settled, and the desert offered her a single moment of perfect clarity. Her rifle spoke. The sound echoed across the range like thunder, and then everything went silent. Even the desert seemed to hold its breath as they waited for the call from the target pit. Williams raised his binoculars, and Maya watched his weathered face for any sign of emotion. Seconds stretched into eternity before the radio crackled to life. Lane 3, dead center. Perfect score. The silence that followed was deafening. Torres lowered his rifle and stared downrange in disbelief. "That's impossible," he muttered. "Nobody makes that shot. Not in these conditions." Williams walked over to Maya's position, his boots crunching on the desert floor. When he spoke, his voice carried the kind of respect that couldn't be faked. "Rodriguez," he said quietly, "that was a hell of a shot." Maya began packing her rifle back into the pink case, her movements calm and precise despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She could feel every eye on the range watching her, but the whispers and snickers had been replaced by something else entirely. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" asked the Marine from Lane 1, a staff sergeant named Collins who'd been respectful but distant throughout the training. Maya closed her case and stood up, dust falling from her uniform. For a moment, she considered giving them the simple answer, the one that would satisfy their curiosity without opening old wounds. Instead, she decided to tell them the truth. "Fallujah," she said simply. Second tour 2018. The Marines around her exchanged glances. Fallujah was a name that carried weight in the Corps. It meant urban combat, close quarters fighting, and the kind of war that tested everything a Marine thought they knew about courage. "I was attached to a recon unit as their radio operator," Maya continued. "Third week into the deployment, our sniper took shrapnel from an IED. Couldn't use his trigger finger. Torres had moved closer, his earlier hostility replaced by something approaching respect." "So what happened?" Maya looked out toward the targets, remembering another desert, another war, another time when everything had depended on a single shot. Command wanted to pull us back until they could get a replacement sniper. But we had Marines pinned down 3 blocks away, and the insurgents had positioned a heavy machine gun in a building that was shredding our guys every time they tried to move. The desert wind picked up, carrying dust across the range like ghosts of battles fought long ago. The building was 850 meters away, same kind of heat, same kind of shifting wind, and we had about 10 minutes before our guys would be overrun. Williams had joined the circle now, along with the other instructors who'd been observing from a distance. Maya realized she had an audience of nearly every Marine left in the program. Our wounded sniper looked at me and said, "Rodriguez, you've been watching me work for 3 weeks. You know the rifle, you know the math. Either you take this shot or a lot of Marines die today." Maya could still remember the weight of that rifle in her hands, the way her heart had hammered against her ribs as she'd settled into position on a rooftop overlooking the city. I'd never made a combat shot before. Hell, I'd barely qualified expert on the rifle range, but I had 6 Marines counting on me, and sometimes that's all the training you need. "Did you make the shot?" Collins asked, though the answer was obvious from the fact that Maya was standing here telling the story. "First round, center mass. Took out the machine gunner and gave our guys the opening they needed to advance." Maya shouldered her pink case and looked around at the faces watching her. "Turned out I was pretty good at it." Torres shook his head slowly. "So you've been, playing dumb this whole time?" "I wasn't playing anything," Maya said firmly. "I earned my place here the same way every other Marine did. Through qualification scores, performance evaluations, and recommendations from my command. The fact that some of you assumed I didn't belong says more about you than it does about me." William stepped forward, and Maya could see something in his expression that looked like pride. "Rodriguez," he said, "there's something you should know. This wasn't just a marksmanship test." Maya felt a cold knot form in her stomach. "Sir? For the past 3 days, we've been evaluating more than your shooting skills. We've been watching how you handle pressure, how you treat your fellow Marines, how you perform when everything is stacked against you." Williams gestured toward Martinez, who was standing nearby with his leg properly bandaged. We saw you sacrifice your own time to help a wounded Marine during the movement. We saw you maintain your composure when faced with harassment and discrimination, and we saw you perform under the kind of pressure that breaks most people. The gunnery sergeant pulled a folder from his clipboard and handed it to Maya. Congratulations, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez. You've been selected for advanced sniper training and immediate assignment to Special Operations Command. Maya opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were orders assigning her to a joint task force that worked directly with Navy SEALs and Army Special Forces. It was the kind of assignment that most Marines could only dream about, but it was the handwritten note at the bottom that made her eyes well up with tears. To the Marine who proves every day that courage comes in all colors, including pink. Your niece would be proud. Colonel Sarah Mitchell, commanding officer. Maya looked up in confusion. How did you know about Sophia? Williams smiled for the first time since she'd arrived at Camp Pendleton. Your battalion commander sent over your full record when you were selected for this program, including the recommendation letter from your platoon sergeant, describing how you've been donating half your pay to children's cancer research, and how you've been training at civilian ranges on your own time and dime to prepare for this opportunity. Torres stepped forward, and Maya tensed, expecting one last insult or challenge. Instead, he extended his hand. I owe you an apology, Rodriguez, he said quietly. I spent so much time looking at what I thought made you different that I missed what actually made you special. Maya shook his hand, feeling the weight of the moment settle around her like desert dust. We all have our reasons for being here, she said. Mine just happens to wear pink. 3 weeks later, Maya stood in a different desert, this time in Syria, preparing for a mission that would have been impossible without the skills she'd developed at Camp Pendleton. Her spotter was a Navy SEAL who'd heard about the Marine with the pink rifle, case who'd outshot every sniper in her class, but it was the text message on her phone that made this moment perfect. Tia Maya, it read. The doctors say I'm getting better. I told them it's because my aunt is out there being brave like a girl. Love you. Maya smiled as she settled behind her rifle, 800 meters from a target that would help save American lives. The pink case lay open beside her, and for the first time since she joined the Marines, she didn't hear any laughter. She heard something better. She heard respect. And in the distance, carried on the desert wind, she could swear she heard the sound of a little girl cheering for her aunt, who'd proven that heroes come in all colors, including pink. The mission was about to begin, and Staff Sergeant Maya Rodriguez was exactly where she belonged.